Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me again on another exciting episode of the Alex Hayes Podcast. I am your host, Alex Hayes, and with me today is a longtime friend of mine, Nathan Poole. He is a successful, multiple eight-figure business owner in the trades and construction in particular, as well as Bitcoin infrastructure and development. He is now working under the title as a strategic business partner to help entrepreneurs grow their businesses to get them to the next level. And he's a father, he's a husband, and he's a great friend. And I am grateful that he is here today, going to share some excellent wisdom with us on the podcast. So Nathan, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Alex, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right. Let's jump into it. For everybody that doesn't know who Nathan is, give us a little bit of intro about yourself and who you are and what you're all about.
Well, in terms of business, I've been intrigued by it since a very young age. I mean, like I was, flipping Campbell's soup labels at our Royal Rangers powwow, right? Trying to make a few bucks. So I'd come home from, the camping trips and I'd have $400 in the 90s as a kid. And my parents would be like, "Where'd you get that?" I was like, "Well, I saved up all my allowance and I was mowing the yards and I bought food and then I flipped the food because I realized they didn't have a good cantina there. And so I made for an 8-year-old a ton of money doing stuff like that. I've just always been intrigued by it. I've loved the idea of business, and then through a bunch of failures, found a way to love business itself and do a lot better at it. So I've probably started, 20 or 30 businesses, but the first at least a dozen and a half, very unsuccessful or very modest success. So it does take a lot of trial and error. And I used to be much more thick-headed in my youth than I am now. And so it took a little bit of practice, but I'm finally starting to figure out a few of the pieces.
Awesome. And how long have you been doing this? How long have you been on this road?
Last time I had a W-2 was 8 years ago. We first launched let's call our first successful business a six-figure business. And so we first launched that one in 2010. So I guess probably about 15 years of kind of being able to do businesses that were able to generate some revenues and some profits.
Nice. Excellent. Let's go back a little bit before you jumped into entrepreneurship. Who was Nathan in high school?
I was the kid that liked pretty much everybody, and most people liked me. I have a strong personality, so there was not a small handful that also very much didn't like me. I very much loved Jesus, but I had the cockiness that comes with, the captain of the wrestling team and the captain of the weightlifting team and that kind of stuff. And so I was very loving and self-sacrificing and friendly and personable and funny, but I definitely had some youthful arrogance that the Lord had to beat out of me, which many of us entrepreneurs had some of that. So I'm grateful he's still working on it, but I'm grateful he's been able to get rid of the bulk of the sinful parts of it, Lord willing.
Understood. I could see that very much. So talk to us about your first business, the very first one.
At 18, I was just going to go frame some houses. I'd been in construction and my dad was a contractor. And I said, you know what, let me try my hand at this thing. And the boss basically gave me the option between being W-2 or 1099. And of course I was like 1099 all day long. And so I did that. And then I realized I could work for other people. And so then I was framing houses for hourly, right? So, but I was still a business. And then I started going door to door. So I went right out of high school into college. So I was in college at the time, and I went door to door, like saying, "Hey, can I help renovate your house?" And people would be like, "Yeah, I want to swap my countertops." And I had no idea how to do any of the things they were asking me to do, but I said, I'll figure it out. And we did. And I don't think we had any, in fact, I would say that we had zero unhappy customers. I found a way to swap floors out and to, swap windows out and countertops and little stuff like that. As I was in college, and then I did a bunch of, some of the trades by myself. As handyman service, some of the stuff I subbed out, and that was kind of to get myself through college. And then after college, I was a pastor for a few years at a handful of churches, and I found myself settled into business.
Awesome. So you started as a pastor. So you were an entrepreneur, dabbling an entrepreneur as a tradesman, and then you became a pastor?
The Lord called me to the ministry in November of 99, and I said no until June of 2023 because I wanted to do business. I didn't want to do pastor stuff, right? And And then I finally gave in. I broke down literally in my car and emotionally on the side of the road. And I just gave it all to God. I said, God, I only want what you want for me. I will pursue ministry. Interestingly enough, everything I touched in ministry from that point forward, I did not do so great at. I was not able to ever successfully grow a ministry. I'm convinced it's the hardest business there is, because the one thing that every minister wants is the thing that they can't do, right? You can't cause spiritual growth. Like, you have to rely on only God to do that. So as a more stubborn and thick-headed young man, I think the Lord was like, no, you can't do that. But I always had my side businesses. And so the businesses ended up exploding and taking off and doing really well. I planted a church. I mean, we had a massive attendance. I think our peak was 12 people. So we did that for a few years. I was a youth pastor, associate pastor, I did all the pastor roles that you can do, and never did so great. Like, most of the time, the crowd shrunk despite me thinking I was, this great preacher that apparently I wasn't. But the crowd shrunk. But the Lord used it to, I think, really refine now at 40, right? What he's got for me. And I think that there's a lot of ministry to be done in the workplace. And it doesn't have to be, I do think it can and probably should be overt and expressed. You hear the old adage, preach the gospel and if necessary, use words. I don't necessarily ascribe to that. I preach the gospel nonstop and all the things that I do. And if it's an employee or an employer or a partner or all those things, I just want everything that I do to be gospel saturated. And the Lord has blessed that approach and our businesses and the things that we've done. So I haven't done any full-time ministry since probably around that 2012 mark, maybe 2014, I guess. But the business part has been really fulfilling for me, and I'm able to preach the gospel to everybody. And if they don't want to be a client, or they don't want to be a partner, or they don't want to be an employee, then that's totally fine. I totally respect that opinion and that outlook. But mine has just been gospel centered, and so it's been a really rewarding task working with the gospel at the center. So I've really enjoyed that part.
I love that. I love that. And being true to who you are and true to the Lord, and making sure that everybody knows what the playing field looks like. I think that's awesome. Talk to us about some of those key lessons that you had to learn as an entrepreneur to help you break into that first level of success. Let's call it that six-figure mark. What were some of those key lessons that you had to learn?
I think at that level, lots of it was negotiation and sales. You have to learn. You had to learn that work-life balance. When I first broke into that six-figure mark, I've actually had a partner or multiple partners in every successful business we've had. So I'm a huge fan of partnerships. You read in my undergrad and taking my business classes, I was like, well, it sounds like partnerships are the worst, but I've on the been by myself, not so hot. But the ones that I've done with partners have been incredible, because it allows there to be the different strengths. Now, you don't want a partner that's the same exact strengths as you, because you're kind of doubling up. But if you can find partners that have complementary strengths, and so our biggest companies always had partners and are most successful, and we've never had a problem with a partner. Like, our partners have always been happy. They've been dear friends or family, and it's been a really beautiful enterprise. And so I would say that some of it was learning how to have a partnership. And for me, right, that first business was a 50-50 partnership with a family member. And so we had a great relationship. And to this day, he's still my family and one of my best friends, right? And so he had this role in the company and I had this role in the company, and there was a little bit of overlap, but we really got ironed out and what his strengths were, and we just went to town work, and it did really well. And I've done several other businesses with him since then. And so I would say some of it was sales, some was negotiation, some was how to find and operate in your strengths in your business and let other people operate in their strengths in your business. And then so I think that those were some of the biggest lessons at the early phase. I also learned, like, general basic, they teach you these things in school. I took a bunch of business classes, in my undergrad and my master's. I took a bunch of business classes, but you learn more in 1 year of entrepreneurship than I learned in 6 years of formal post high school graduation or education. And so, general stuff like, hey, here's how you keep here's an easy way for keeping your receipts and for filing your taxes and doing the very basic, components of building a business.
Awesome. Awesome. So definitely sales, negotiation, learning how to play to your strengths. How does one go about selecting a business partner? Let's dive a little bit deeper into that, because maybe some people are out there and they have a business partner, or they're considering bringing on a partner to help their business. But what are some of those qualifiers that you look for, and how to spot somebody that's going to be a good complement to you?
So that has morphed from the early days. So I think in the early days, we just said, hey, I want to do business with this guy. Let's find a business. And then it turned into, let's find the strengths, which I think is a better approach, right? Let's find the strengths of this person that has a business and make sure that we're feeding the hot hand, right? And if those are their strengths, let's put them to work. In fact, I read the series by Marcus Buckingham. I had to double check the author there. But Marcus Buckingham wrote a few books on like putting your strengths to work. And I was introduced to those in college and they made a lot of sense. And so just finding a way that, all right, if this person does these things really well, do I have strengths that can do these other components, specifically working on the business really well? And so I've been in businesses where I'm the operator, right? Where I'm making the day-to-day calls. And then I've been in business where I'm the guy that works on the business while the operator works in the business roles, right? There is a big difference between working in your business and on your business. And so most of the businesses I'm involved in now, I have the privilege of working on the business. And that I think, I guess from the fruits, right, that it's an area that the Lord's blessing me in. It's humbling to think that, but he has made it a passion of mine and I really do enjoy it. And he seems to continue to show fruit through it. So that's currently what most of what I've been doing has been revolving around, is working on the business. And so I think that as you mature as a business owner, entrepreneur, just as a person, I think you kind of, those priorities kind of start to evolve as well. And so I don't know if I'm there. I might be on stage 2 of 7, right? Like, so, but I'm just saying I started out as, hey, I want to do business with this person. And it's kind of turned into, is this person like-minded and aligned in our vision for the world, like gospel-centric vision for the world? And then do they have strengths that my strengths complement as opposed to clash against? And would my strengths be helpful and beneficial for this partner? And so that's kind of been the question that we've been asking the last few years. And it's been so far so good.
Awesome. I love that. So making sure that they're a good cultural fit first, and
Yeah,
then make sure that you're complementary skill sets and you're putting people in a position of playing to their strengths or what you look for a solid business relationship.
exactly.
Awesome. No, I think that's solid words for sure. So sales and negotiations helps get you to a six-figure level. Now, you've had multiple businesses, you said, make it to 7 and 8 figure levels. That's a big jump. 6 figures to 7, 8 figures. That's a different size business. That's a different class,
Yes.
right? Different class. What were some of those transitions like to go from a six-figure entrepreneur to a 7, 8 figure entrepreneur? And break it down a little bit here on what are the skill sets that brought you to that next level.
Alex, when I was a kid, I was a wrestler I started wrestling at like 3 years old, right? That was the only sport that I really dedicated like my youth to. And I wrestled all through high school and planned to go to college with it. And I was wrestling at the time against it was at Brandon High School in Florida, which at the time they had the longest world record streak of undefeated in the dual match. They were like the toughest on the planet, and an Olympic medalist was their coach, and all of his and his son's friends were all like these just monsters, right? Just incredibly talented. They went on to be 2, 3 time NCAA champs, D1 champs, and they're just incredible. So from the age of 3 till about 14, for those 11 years, I won my first wrestling match and I never won again. So I had my butt handed to me for over a decade of my youth. My Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays were just me getting my butt absolutely whooped. And finally, at about the decade mark, I was probably about 13, I said, Dad, I'm done. I quit. I hate this sport. I've never won a match. And he's like, just keep going. Trust me. You don't know the monsters you're going against. This is how you get good. And I was like, I'm out. So I guess kind of quit for 6 months. And then I started high school in 8th grade. He says, why don't you come play on the high school team just as an exhibition match and see how you do against these high school kids? And I tore them up. And these are kids that are a lot bigger, a lot older than me. And I was just wiping the mat with them. And I realized, like, now in retrospect, Angela Duckworth has a book called Grit. And she basically boils down, she uses an analogy from like hockey players and so forth, but she boils down the idea that success in any endeavor essentially can be boiled down to grit. And those first 10 years of my cognizant memory as a child of just getting just destroyed on a wrestling mat and crying as a kid. And you come off and he's like, don't worry, we'll go to Chuck E. Cheese and make it better. So I stopped being in it for the wrestling. I started being in it for the Chuck E. Cheese, right? But between that and delayed gratification, and I still have my Chuck E. Cheese tickets, which are no longer any good. Inflation's even wiped those out. But the ability to delay gratification coupled with grit, delayed gratification being the number one indicator of financial success and grit being the number one indicator of business success, according to every book that I can read on the subject. So if you can combine those two components, you really have the recipe for just an incredibly profitable, beneficial business for the world. And through a bunch of failure in wrestling, I built the characteristic of grit. And so I think going from 6 to 7 figures was merely a characteristic of grit. Like, I think it's just saying, oh, okay, well, years 1 through 3 weren't profitable. That's okay. I'm in my 20s. Let's rock and roll. So being willing to deal with a lot of abuse and pain and happy people and being able to keep that smile on regardless of it and navigate interpersonal conflict, learn how I didn't have some, mentor come alongside me at the time and say, here's how to do it. It was just trial and error, the hard, long, old fashioned way. Now that I'm a little bit older, I see the value in having found mentors, and I have mentors and people that I mentor. But at the time I didn't have that, right? So I just bare knuckle grit your teeth and go through it. And I really think that was the difference. Just, okay, well, the business wasn't profitable this year. Sounds like we just have to try harder next year. Sounds like I need to put in more hours. Sounds like I need to put in more time learning and studying and reading. Sounds like I need to put in more time figuring out where the problems are and how to address them and how to overcome them. And so I think that grit component is where most entrepreneurs probably fall off. They might get to 4 or 5, 6 figures and say, wow, I've got 6 figures in revenue, but I'm only making $5,000 a year and it's not worth it. And I quit or give up. And I think that those are the years that really push you through to get to the next level and really start to focus on how do you get through this dry spell, whatever that may be. And that dry spell could be emotional, or it could be financial, or it could be, interpersonal and all these different areas. But pushing through that barrier, wherever that barrier is, and saying, I'm not giving up. You cannot pin me, right? You're not going to stick my back to the mat. I'm going to fight with everything I've got. I think that's the biggest ticket, probably.
Wow. So simply just continuing to do the basics really well long enough to see results, huh?
Yeah, and perpetually trying to learn off of them, right? Like, we don't want to be insane. We don't want to do the same thing over and over expecting different results, but we do want to just have that grit and say, all right, year number 3, this happened, and let's sit back and look at our bills. Let's sit back and look at our expenses. Let's sit back and look at our recurring charges as well as our one-time charges. Let's look at the ROI on our marketing. Let's look at the ROI on how much it costs a development representative to go into a house and bid this project. Like, whatever that component is, figuring out these things are making me more profitable, these things are making me less profitable. So it's grit will get you to that question, but you still have to be asking the questions. How can I improve? What are we failing at? If it's money, then let's figure out why. If it's HR, let's figure out why we're hiring poorly. Do we need to outsource something? Are there people that we can hire alongside of us to help us with these components? Are there people that I trust their judgment of humans better than my judgment of humans, so we can use them to help us hire? And so I think that the grit to get there, and then the I don't know if it's wisdom or intelligence or luck, whatever you want to call it, right? Of stepping back and saying, all right, why are we failing? How are we failing? And how do we get better in these areas? I think that when you put those things together, it really pushes you over that edge.
I love that. It sounds like a lot of pattern recognition and strategic thinking. High level strategic thinking is what helps you. And then grit brings it together and you're able to pull yourself over the finish line. That's awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's great advice for anybody at any stage. But where do you see business owners get stuck? Where do most business owners get stuck in that $250,000 business, and they're, taking home 75,000 or taking home just barely 6 figures? Where do people get stuck in between what you're talking about of the strategic thinking and falling into the plateau?
I think that most business owners get to where they got, right? Get to where they got, if you will, by being really great in areas of strength that they have and then they plateau when those areas of strength no longer can take them to the next level. So to be a successful, to add that next digit, there's always that next level of skill sets to be aware of. And these are things that you don't even know that you don't know. Right. And so whatever that digit, we'll call it for lack of a better term, whatever that digit is that you get stuck at, there's a component of skills that you either can spend 5 or 10 years saying, all right, is it this and trying these things, or is it this and trying these things? And it can take the long way, which is the way that I did it, right? I'd say it was thick-headed, but I wasn't even trying to be thick-headed. I was just, just saying, I don't know what it is I don't know, and I don't have anybody teach me, so I'm just going to try and figure it out. So I think that is what I see most frequently is that. It's that somebody is, for example, really good at this skilled trade, whether that's digital or in person or whatever. And I'm really good at sales and I'm really good at sales and I'm really good at negotiation and I'm really good at execution. I'm not so great at hiring to be able to scale this thing. I'm not so great at marketing to be able to scale this thing. I'm not so great at, tax management to be able to properly utilize what would otherwise be taxes and build those back in the business. I'm not great at capital management and deploying the capital back in the business. So there's hundreds of skill sets on both sides that they probably do have, and then also that they probably don't have. And when you don't have those skill sets, it is extremely slow to learn those skill sets and oftentimes extremely painful. I'm doing it in one of my businesses right now. I'm coding an app and I'm like, I have never built an app in my life, but I've never been pinned in a wrestling match, in high school. So I'm like, I'm not going to get pinned. I'm going to learn this thing. I built one and I realized, the technology I built it on, the language I built it on is insufficient for the amount of data I want to put in. I've got to do it again on a completely different platform. Let me get back at it. Right. And so realizing like that there are things that, for me, right, it's frustrating, right? I've built a bunch of websites, haven't built an app. Now I built one and we never got published. Now I'm on number 2. So it's overwhelming. Like it's super overwhelming sitting here in front of a computer and saying, how do I code in a language that I've never used before? It can be overwhelming. It can be daunting, but the entrepreneur that's successful and that goes to that next level is going to say, I don't care how daunting it is. You're not going to pin me, right? My back's not going to the mat. I'm going to figure it out. I don't care if I have to ask 10,000 chatbot questions to an AI guy to teach me how to code in this new language, or if I have to, hire dudes on freelance sites to provide me education for doing it. There's so much content on YouTube showing you how to do these things. Like I will learn what I have to learn about this skill set. And so when you do those types of things, it really generates within you this ability to realize, well, hold on, that's just a skill set. And it's just another thing. And some people, if somebody has a plumbing business, some people might be overwhelmed. Well, how do you figure out the slope on a drain pipe? Okay, well, once you practice a little bit, you figure it out. And how do you do a union between a PEX and a copper pipe? Okay, well, it takes some time, but there's a component that you can learn. It's the same exact thing with every other business skill and every other business structure. They're just components. And so learning what components you don't know and either hiring to fill those components or teaching yourself those components so that you can grow your business, I think is where that success comes in. That's where that level is next. The next step up happens. And so it could be marketing, it could be HR and hiring and firing. It could be how do we optimize and systemize the way that we do our bidding or the way that we do our proposals or whatever those things are. There's going to be ways that you can save time, effort, and energy. And then if you deploy your human capital, your energy and time, to saving your time, now you have more human capital over here for these other skill sets for how to grow, how to work in your business. You optimize the time that you're doing in your business so that you have time to work on your business. And so I think that that's a big component. Like people get so overwhelmed working very long weeks in their business. And instead of trying to optimize that so they have the time and mental capacity and resources to work on the business and then learning the skill sets that you don't have. So I think, again, you can do it trial and error. You can do it with mentors. You can do it with partners. You can do it a bunch of different ways. But figuring out what it is you don't know that's stopping that, I think, is a huge ticket.
So in your perspective, it's entrepreneurs rise to the level of their skill sets, and then if they don't advance their skill sets beyond where they're at right now, they don't change or adjust their strategy, they end up hitting this plateau that they just can't get out of, and it creates this repetitive cycle of repeating the same 12 months over and over again.
Absolutely. And so any entrepreneur that finds himself hitting that ceiling, they're like, well, hey, we did $300,000 in revenue last year at X% margin. And this year we did $302,000. Like, It's the same. And then the year after it's 298. Well, why is our plateau at 300K? Why are we plateauing? And you have to be able to step back and say, what is it that I don't know? And there's so many resources available online. And Alex, you're a great resource for that in your education program. But it's like, there's these resources that are of these people that want to come along and help you. Like, how do you get from point A to point B? And you have to be willing to step back and it takes a certain amount of intellectual humility to say, all right, I'm clearly the problem. I've been doing 300K for a few years and I can't figure out how to get past it. Or my target is this percent ROI and I'm stagnant, or I want to do these things, but I'm missing something. It just is digging. And so you can dig the hard way, like I did, right? Or you can call somebody that can help you, or you can bring on the right employee or the right partner, or learn the right skills, or take the right class, right? I'm not so much a fan of like college classes, but I'm a huge fan of like online classes. And so like finding the right class, how do I need to scale this thing? How do I need to grow this thing? What am I missing? And most often the fastest growth happens from bringing in outside people that can see where your blind spots are, right? If you don't know where your blind spots are and you're plateauing and you're flatline, you're like, well, okay, well, I've got this thing, but what do I do with it now? Right? There's a blind spot. And so finding people that can come alongside you and teach you your blind spots, I think for me has been very valuable. And I'm tend to see the value that people like you and I bring to others in doing that type of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So, I, to expand on this a little bit further too, I see, I'll get your perspective on this too. So I see a lot too is when business owners, they try to go back to what worked 20, 30 years ago as a tactic,
Mm.
right? Because they can't grow, or they haven't grown in their understanding of the market landscape of how things have changed, especially with AI now. And they try to revert back to the old tactics that rewarded them in the past, but those were multiple decades, and sometimes in some aspects multiple decades ago. And what worked then is not new now, right? And you see this cycle of they just keep going back to the same playbook that they used to use, or they use back, and they just get stuck, right? And they're wasting money, putting money into resource and time and effort into things that are not going to produce for them, and they can't see that. What would be your advice again for these business owners that are feeling stuck in this rut? What would you say to them?
Personally, what I found for me that was the most effective was bringing on a business partner. That was the way that we did it. We brought on a business partner, and I told him, I'm like, here's our business, what we've got. Would you be interested in partner with us? I approached him, and he was like, yeah, I'm in. And we found a deal that worked. And then I asked him, I said, will you mentor me? Because he was at that next level, right, or a couple levels above where I was at. And I said, can you mentor me in doing this? And he ended up being not just a dear friend and an extremely godly man, but somebody that has provided a ton of wisdom and insight for our businesses. So finding that the level that I was at and bring us to the next level. And so I think for us, that was what it was. It was a partner. And I told him, he was like, well, what do you want out of me? I was like, I want to eat lunch with you on Tuesdays. All right. Every Tuesday, I want you to teach me stuff and we did for years. And he just was a wealth of knowledge, and I was able to learn a great deal from him. And so that I think was a huge resource for us coming out of so like finding mentors. I didn't have to necessarily be a partner. He was a partner and is a partner in at least one or two of our businesses, but finding a mentor or a partner or a consultant or a coach or a team, finding an individual or group of individuals that you can surround yourself with, or we did mastermind groups, right? So like whether it's a mastermind or an educational program, it's finding a way to get your hands on the data that you need. Because most entrepreneurs, when you get up to that six-figure revenue mark, that means, that's not a slouch job. That's a tough thing to do. It shows you've got the grit, you've got at a minimum, a great deal number of skills. Well, what do we have to do to get to the next level? Finding people that can sharpen those skills and can help you grow. I think that for me was the change.
I love it. I love it. Surround yourself with the right people to help, that know and have been where you've been before and can help see things from different perspectives. I think that's solid wisdom. So let's talk a little bit about leadership, right? Because at especially at a 7, 8 figure business level, leadership is super important, because you have to be able to create a vision, inspire, and motivate your team to be able to execute that vision. What are some key leadership frameworks or lessons that you have really grasped and held on to as treasured nuggets of wisdom, right? Talk to us about your leadership framework and how you were able to grow teams and operate teams so successfully.
Well, that's a great question. I would say we started at a relational level when in our earlier businesses, when I would hire, it was strictly employee employer relationship, not nearly as effective. But now, like I have people on my team that I love dearly and that I'll go to war for them and they would go to war for me. And so building those relationships on your team. Now, obviously, you don't want to come out of the gate on a hire and be like, all right, we're best buddies. There's also lines there, right? But the flip side of that is making sure that you have an incredibly great rapport and that you wouldn't ask anybody on your team to do something that you wouldn't be willing to do yourself, right? You want to make sure that you are leading by example. So Mark Rutland has a handful of books on servant leadership that I found very helpful in this regard. Larry Dobbs has a book called Life Skills. It's incredibly good, filled with nuggets of wisdom. I think he actually calls them nuggets of wisdom in the book. Like finding good books that teach you how to lead well. And consuming them and learning from them and learning how to do it right. And then taking the good and leaving the bad. So in any book I read or in any group that I lead, I try to take the good and leave the bad. And I even tell my kids, right? There's gonna be things I do that are great. And you're gonna be like, yeah, I want to do that when I have kids. And there's gonna be things I do that you don't love. And so just discard the bad, take the good, leave the bad. And in my leadership style, and recognize I'm gonna make mistakes and feel free to we'll have an open dialogue about it. And when there's no emotions involved, and we'll have a dialogue that's as long as it's respectful. And you can tell me, hey, I feel like I would grow more if you did these things, and creating that open dialogue where there's a relationship and there's mutual respect and care for each other. I think that just general human decency for me helped a lot. Our first freelancer, I probably spoke extremely too harshly with and way too intensely and bossy. And then I like to think that I've learned a handful of lessons since then. And I approach all of my business relationships now as partnerships, whether they're an employee or a freelancer or a partner, a legal partner. This is a partnership. I'm asking you to do these things for me if you're willing, and you're asking me to consider these things for you if I'm willing, and let's have a mutually respectful dialogue. And so I think that mentality, I think, allowed me to build a core group of leaders that were extremely competent and extremely loyal. And so I think that loyalty component is so rare in today's culture. You want to find those people and you want to hang on to them.
Wow. So looking at it from not all relationships are the same, but everybody's deserving of respect.
Yeah.
Right. I think that starting at that level and that framework, I think is super solid. And then from there, you build relationships with, depending on the level of intimacy of those that are closer to your circle, right? Those that you need to rely on more and more are going to be closer to to closer to you on the inside, right?
Yes.
And being able to communicate that you care for those people as people first, and then mission second. That sound right?
Yeah. I would say that your people have to come before. I think that typically your mission should include people in it, and your employees and partners and all these things should be involved in that. But yeah, your people have to come first. I mean, at the end of the day, a business is an entity that, whether we like it or not, in 300 years, they're all gone, right? I don't think there's any business today, that's maybe a handful, that are older than 300 years. I don't know, but I don't. We won't go down the conspiracy theory rabbit trail, but people have to come first. Yeah. And people are the ones that carry your mission forward. And so finding that mission, making sure you are aligned with people that also want that mission intrinsically, not just because they're on your team, and then building that camaraderie and making sure that there's that relationship where you guys are willing to work for each other, and mutually respect each other. I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, I love that. A concept that me and my wife have been going back and forth on a little bit here, and really chewing on, and that God's been really speaking to us about, is the concept of stewardship, where
Mm,
we are, we're here for such a short amount of time, and we are given resources, time, and talent to steward in God's name. And when our time is up, we push everything back into the center of the table, and that's it, right? Somebody else has to take that on, and somebody else is going to get those resources, and somebody else is going to, hopefully you pass down knowledge. But even going as so far as say that our kids really aren't our kids, even though they were given to us. They're God's kids. And when we
yeah.
get to heaven, where it's not going to be Alex dad, my son Edward, it's going to be, we're all just children of God right there before the throne on equal level. And from that aspect, we're shepherding our kids,
Yeah.
shepherding everything that we've been given. I think that when you look at it from that perspective, and that's to your point, I say that to your point here of nobody's here forever. Don't typically make it 300 years, but the resources and your knowledge and the way that you impact people does have implications in this life and through eternity. So I think you're spot on there.
Yeah, my dad says the only thing that we ever truly leave behind is our influence. And
Mhm.
so, you can say, all right, well, I had a financial influence, but at the end of the day, the only one that stays really behind is the emotional and spiritual influence.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about how you successfully moved from owner to investor, like owner operator to owner investor. Let's talk about that mentality and that shift. What were some of the things that helped you go from operator to investor in your mind? Because I think that's another big thing that a lot of business owners struggle with getting their identity wrapped up inside of the business itself.
For me, it was a little unconventional. The COVID hit and we got involved in the stock market and very, very tiny amount. And my wife says, hey, let me buy a bunch of books on, by Warren Buffett. And let me buy you the textbooks he read in college, right? So like securities analysis, which is this 5 times bigger than the Bible kind of textbook. And so I started going down the rabbit trail and I found the securities analysis component very unappealing to me. But I did find a handful of the things that Warren Buffett said in some of his essays to be extremely appealing. And the one that for me was pretty transformational was he said the primary two jobs that a CEO has is how to earn capital and how to deploy capital. And I never thought about it like that. Like, and he discusses it not just financially, but also like time wise and resource wise. So, like, there's a component where a CEO has to lead a company. And then there's a component where a CEO has to figure out how better to lead a company. One is working in the business, one is working on it. And in that case, it's just working on themselves. And the same thing with money. All right, how do I make money? But then what do I do with the money once I've got it? How do I deploy it properly? And so if you look at Berkshire Hathaway, right, it was an insurance company and now they have RVs, right? Like they're all over the place. And now it's almost exclusively a financial instrument. But if you look at financial instrument makes money, it's in everything from Coca-Cola to, so it's from soft drinks to RVs and real estate and all the banks and all this other stuff that they invest in. And I realized like I was not actively deploying the excess capital from our businesses in a way that was intended specifically and cognizantly in a way to try and earn ROIs on it. And that didn't for me mean passive investing. So again, I looked at the stock market and I said 8% is not for me. And the volatility and the up and down, and if I need it's not liquid, it's not for me. So what we resolved to do is we said we resolved to start with any excess monies, other businesses, and then to figure out how to take those businesses and diversify our portfolio in businesses. So at this time, we had scaled 3 businesses to 8 figures and said, all right, well, what do we do with excess capital and how do we deploy it? And what does that look like? And so we fed the hot hand, right? We know business. So we said, let's do more businesses. And then we realized that some of the strengths in those businesses were outside of our wheelhouse. So let's bring in partners of people that have the strengths that we need in these businesses. And so that's where we kind of started doing that. Specifically, I think the first time I ever sought out a partner was in 2020, maybe the very beginning of 2021. And to this day, he's one of our partners and great guy. And so that was when I realized like there's outside of our immediate circle of partners that we've worked with, there's some great benefits in finding new people that have strengths that you need. This was the guy that, mentored me, right? And so it's like finding people that you need to have help you show you where the blind spots are. And in fact, his influence was so influential. It's literally why we started partnering with other businesses. We said, I would say his name, but we want to be that guy to other people. We want to be this beacon of encouragement and wisdom, help. And so he was essentially the inspiration from it. And he was, so I think this is our 5th year being partners with him. And so that was kind of the route that we ended up taking. We wanted to deploy capital, but we wanted to deploy it into a thing that we could control as much as anybody can control a business because there's so many uncontrollables in business. And especially as I talk about COVID, right? But we wanted to be able to have our hands in the money and make the money work more aggressively. We knew that we could flip houses or wholesale land or invest in real estate, and that we would get a ROI of X% as a range. And so we said, all right, we'll start with there. And then we said, we want to branch outside of real estate because most of our businesses were real estate, related, finance, construction, and brokering and wholesales and flips and, new construction, short-term. I mean, everything in commercial, residential, everything in real estate we did. And we said, all right, let's branch out of real estate. And so we started getting into a few new businesses. So like now we're in the fitness and supplement business, and we're in the crypto mining business, and we're in a handful of these other businesses where we've diversified the portfolio, but it's the same principles. Like once you really understand how to work on a business, it's the same principles. It doesn't matter what the industry is. So that was really what kind of got us into the partnering with other people business was that first partnership. And it was so beautiful and beneficial. We said, let's be that agent of light and help for small business owners that might not necessarily have it.
All of that came from Warren Buffett, one sentence.
Yeah, that's correct. Warren Buffett, one sentence. He has a book. It's on his essays. I can't quickly find the title for you, but it's literally there. It is Warren Buffett. It's called Essays. It's a list of essays that Warren Buffett wrote, and he had some really, really great content in there. So I got 0 out of all the big textbooks, but this one little tiny book, Warren Buffett's Essays, and he just talks, and lots of them come from Berkshire Hathaway, like stakeholder meetings, and so he kind of paraphrases them or writes them out. And I was like, that's it, bingo, that's the light, that's the next level. How do I get from 8 figures active to 8 figures passive, and how do I go from 8 figures revenue to 8 figures profit, right? Like, so these are the things I want to do. How do I do that? And he had just the principles, just the nuggets. And then we said, okay, now that I know the nugget, now that I know the blind spot, now that was a blind spot. I was looking for, how do I find my blind spot? And that was for us a blind spot. I said, all right, how do I deploy my efforts into that blind spot? So I read what I could on my blind spot, learned what I could on my blind spot, and brought in mentors and partners to help me in my blind spots. And that was the ticket for the next level.
That's amazing. So if you haven't read the book Essays by Warren Buffett,
I'm sure he's got plenty of them, but it was great. It was, for me, life changing.
That's awesome. No, that's super, super powerful. So the mental shift there is important because you start to think of yourself as a CEO and as the chief steward of your business, and how to get more capital, and then how to allocate the capital effectively. And you become a manager of your own monetary assets.
Yes.
That's a very unique way of looking at it that a lot of business owners, especially in trades, right? I mean, how many times have you seen this story? Tradesmen, they start as a trade, they learn a trade, say, I'm good at this trade, I'm going to hang my shingle out there and I'm going to do the trade, right? I'm going to be my own boss. And then they get stuck in being their own boss, and they make a little bit of money and they just get stuck,
yes.
Right? And they don't know what they don't know. And they never think of themselves as an investor. They always think of themselves as the operator. I have to do this for work. I have to exchange my time for money. That is how the world works. So I think that framework is just a small little shift of how do you get more capital and how do you allocate that capital?
Yes.
That's
and
huge.
Realizing, like, let's say you're small trade and your revenues are 300K and you're making 100K. And that seems great. But if you're living on the 100K that you're making, you're not investing the capital back in your business to grow it. And so there might come some years where you say, all right, maybe I got to live on 80K and invest 20K back in. But then you have the questions, well, what do I put the 20K in? You make that step. Well, what do I do it at? What does that mean? How do I do it in a way that I can still try and make my 100K net? How do I make that 20K make me another 20K so I can make my 100K, right? And so it's not a simple formula. And I don't think there is a formula for it. I think it's just that process of finding where's my blind spots and how do I deploy capital or resources. In my case, it was the resource of my time. How do I deploy my time into learning now that Warren Buffett helped me identify this blind spot? How do I deploy my mental capital into that area and figure out how to do these things better? And then for us, we did it the hard way again. We did it trial and error, right? We invested in everything we could. We tried everything from stocks and annuities and crypto, and we found that we had a sweet spot in construction. And so we said, all right, land wholesaling and land flips we did, and rentals and short terms and long terms. We found the things we did and didn't like. They were pretty much all profitable, but some of them we found took way too much time than was worth it. And so then we found, we said, hey, we want to deploy into, how do I deploy into tax advantaged businesses? How do I deploy into businesses that are more prone to being hands off than hands on to free up my time? How do I deploy into businesses that I can easily structure in teams and not need to have my time in it? So we started asking the right questions. And so once we learned the blind spot, then we asked all the questions. We did a lot of trial and error. And then we said, all right, how do I ask the right question so there's less error and more trial? And so we it took years, right, of kind of filtering through that and finding the right investment vehicles for us and the right strategies for business deployment. But we've got something right now that I like and I enjoy doing it. I enjoy waking up early, and I work from home, so I still put on my dress shoes and my dress pants and my button down to remind myself I'm working, because it's not this. I used to have teams of dozens of people, and now I've got teams of 3. And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to still be professional, and I'm going to show up, and I'm going to clock in at this time, and I'll work until the family decides that they want dinner, and if they want to go play a game, or and they don't, if they want, that way I've got that flexibility of an entrepreneur, but it's still, it's a really great work-life balance being able to do it this way. And so that, I think, was the ticket, was finding the blind spots, identifying them, finding them, and then figuring out how to ask the right questions about it.
Knowing what question to ask is so powerful.
Very much.
And so you mentioned that everything in business has got basically the same basic principles. Can you walk us through what are some of those main basic principles that you discovered that work and that are true across industry barriers, right? What are some of those things that you found?
Totally impromptu, so I'm sure I'm going to miss a bunch of spots, but some of your basic principles are your marketing. And that's comprehensive, right? That's not just advertising. That's like what's your brand? And I think that a lot of people incorrectly spend a lot of energy and effort on brand related marketing instead of the type of direct marketing that they should be doing. We found very great success with very little budgets in our direct marketing. I said, all right, there's a skill I've got to learn. And so I spent a month, like every waking moment, learning, how do I need to do this? And then it turned into, we did it pretty successfully. And I said, okay, well, that was a hot hand. Let's try it again. And then I spent, months more learning. And then you get to the point where instead of spending $1,000 to get 1,200 in revenue, you spend a few $100s to get millions. And so there's ways of doing things that are more effective. And it's either hire somebody that's going to produce those results. But honestly, as a business owner, typically we've found ourselves like, once you get to that point, you find yourself exceeding to the point of competence, and then you flatline to the level of your competence. So you either have to grow your own competence. The level of people that have the competence of a 6-figure entrepreneur is a very, very small pool to pick from. So I said, in my mind, I was like, again, it might be the youthful arrogance of being in my early 30s. I don't know what it was, but I said, I would just rather learn it myself. And I'm glad, because I have these lifelong skills now in these areas. But I said, all right, I'm going to learn these things over the next few months. And I did. And then we deployed it great. And then I said, what's my next blind spot? Here. All right, let me learn everything I can about this circle, and let me do a little bit of trial and error, and let me do a ton of learning, and here. And so that was kind of the approach that we took to it. And for us, it worked out really well.
Awesome. So it's just constantly identifying what skill deficiency you have or your business has.
Yes.
And then figure out if you're going to devote the time to correct it, or if you're just going to hire it out.
And so those areas could be marketing. It could be people leading, right? We would call that HR, human resources, those types of things. But how do you lead people, essentially, is what it boils down to. It could be in the actual craft itself. Typically, once they make that 6-figure mark, it's not as much in the craft, but surely there's ways of making it more efficient. So it could be in the craft itself. It could be in the way that the craft is delivered via proposal, right? It could be a way that you automate or systematize your processes internally. It could be internal processes exclusively, right? Like, I've got 5 people doing this task that I can have an AI chatbot do, right? So it could be, how do I streamline? Streamlining is a big component, right? How do I put the least amount of man hours on an inside task? Then how can I put the least amount of man hours on an outside task, right? A customer facing task. It's making sure that you've got these people skills. So there's probably, dozens, if not hundreds of these different bubbles, these different circles in business, but identifying the most crucial ones in the entrepreneur's mind of what we really have to do, and then becoming an expert in it. You either have to become an expert in it, or you have to be an expert in hiring the person that's an expert in it. So you either have to be an expert at hiring or an expert in that thing. So pick one, because you're not going to grow that bubble without one of the two. And so if you're an expert in hiring, I wasn't. I had I still have an incredible team member that's super good at hiring. That is way better than I will probably ever be. And I'm super grateful she's on our team. And so she handles that. So I don't even look at them. I'm like, no, can you please review this person and tell me that they're not a good fit? And if she comes back and says, no, they're a really good fit, I said, okay, that's what I need to know. Then I'll do my interview, but mine's like the rubber stamp, right? I'm not like, I trust that person's judgment. And even that hire came through trial and error of a lot of failures. So we ended up, trying our best to hire slow and fire fast. So once you realize that person's not there, let's just do everybody the mercy of letting that person go right now. And we'll start over. And it's better to start over now than start over 6 months and $10,000 later, $30,000 later, and causing the error and the trauma within your group of people. So there's just so many skill sets that you either have to be really good at hiring for it, or you have to be really good at doing yourself. So I spent years just teaching myself these different bubbles of skills to try and figure them out.
I love that. Let's talk a little bit more, as we're kind of wrapping up the segment a little bit here, but let's talk about who you are looking for and who do you help right now?
I've been involved in a missions organization in El Salvador for a while now, and I'm partnering with this company that, and by our metrics, are very tiny, right? Um, I think, low 6-figure revenues. And they were like, wow, all this stuff that you're telling us is just like this mind blowing, incredible. And I'm like, well, you're sitting here. I mean, they're clapping for me. I'm like, you guys are tooting my horn, but I do not feel like my horn is worth tooting right now. Like I'm just, in my mind, these are very basic, business things that people should, know as they grow in their businesses. But I realize, like, we're able to help businesses that bring people out of poverty around the world. And then I started thinking about the amount of wealth in our country that is squandered or is not properly utilized to help people out of poverty. And then I started thinking about the poverty of Christians in this country. Now, poverty is a relative term, right? So when I talk about El Salvador poverty, I'm talking, let's get them making more than $4 a day. And when I talk American poverty, if it's a family of 5 or 6, I might be saying, all right, let's get them out of where they're making 50 or 60K, right? Depending on the city. And so it's, how do we bring people out of poverty so that we can further the kingdom? And so I got talking with another one of these entrepreneurs that I was down there with, and I really like that business model. I'm going to do that, but I'm going to exclusively work with Christian business owners, which gives me a very tiny niche. And that's fine, because I'm not trying to scale my business, scaling business, right? Like, just picking up a handful of partners that I'm working with that I can say, all right, let's work together and show you some of these blind spots, and let's work together so that way we can both generate a lot more revenue for the kingdom, so we can deploy it in the kingdom. Because obviously the way that we get to deploy it in the kingdom, though, is by making the business a lot more profitable, making us a lot more money so that we can help a lot more people. And so that was the way that we kind of got involved in it. And then I was inspired by, the business partner I've referenced. I was like, I want to be that guy to other people, where he comes in and kind of saves, and my business can be more profitable even if I don't work more. Like, how is it, like, being that light in a world that is dark, but especially yoked together with strong believers, people that really love Jesus and want to see his kingdom come, and want to do good for others. So that's what we've been doing. And it's just been incredibly rewarding. I think the last time I've had a job that was this rewarding was probably teaching the Bible itself at a Christian school, right? And so it's just been incredibly rewarding to help other business owners grow their businesses and realize that I can make a lot more money than I thought, which allows me to give away a lot more money than I thought, and work less hours, so I have more time with my family, which is my primary ministry. Wow, I want that. Let's do that. And so helping them learn the easy way, the lessons that I had to learn the hard way, has been incredibly rewarding for me.
That's awesome. So you're looking for Christian business owners that are looking to grow and scale their company. And what size business should consider maybe reaching out to you, and who would be a good fit for you?
I know that there's a handful of niches out there. I think really I'm more concerned with the business being the type of business that I can help scale. I haven't yet run into one. I'm sure it will come. I'm not trying to say my skills are incredible or anything at all like that. I'm just trying to say, so far, what we've encountered is that the things that I find as glaring bubbles in my mind of, oh, if we just fix these things, I'm working with a business right now where we're fixing a product, and the product should just absolutely explode. But the product was the issue. The marketing channel was incredible, is incredible. Marketing is off the hook. The product was really, really poor. And so fixing the product and then using this existing marketing channel to explode it should be an extremely easy task. But they needed somebody to say, hey, this product is not only it's a wrong type of product, and it's a really poor product. So we need a different type of product, and we need it to be super high quality to be able to charge the prices we want. So things like that, that from an outsider's perspective, I come in and I find them, oh, this is super obvious. And then I realize like those, it's only obvious because I failed so many times in those endeavors, right? How do you get a good product, and how do you keep it good, and how do you market it to people, right? So those types of things, I only want to partner with businesses where the leaders, the owners, are extremely zealous for the Lord and are willing to change and adapt to the times. And then I obviously I'm only interested in partnering with businesses where I see, here's these huge spheres of untapped potential monetarily and untapped in your time. Like, let's give you your time back and let's make you a lot more money with that. And if those handful of things come together, I say, let's go for it. And so that's kind of what we look for. I know that there's a big niche in like the boomer market where they've got a 6-figure business and they're like, hey, I'm looking to exit, but my exit probably looks like shut down the company. Or where they say, hey, I want to grow, somebody that maybe is in their 40s and say, I want to grow this company, but I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm not a businessman, but I stumbled into this thing that people like, and it's 6 figures of revenue, but what do I do with it? And so there's just so many different niches. So I kind of identify the person, and then I make sure that my skill sets match what could help them scale pretty quickly and easily. And if the person is right and my skill sets for that opportunity are right, that's when I think it's a really good partnership.
Awesome. So if you think that's you, you should definitely reach out to Nathan. We're going to have a link to all of his socials and his website and where the best they can reach out to you. Is it going to be by email, website, phone number?
Email's probably best. Yeah.
Email. Okay. So we'll make sure that we got your email in the description below so that people can reach out to you directly, and you can, if you feel like that's you and you're feeling that tug and you want to connect with Nathan, please feel free to do so. That is why we do what we do, to help promote great people just like Nathan. If you had a final thought you want to have to business owners struggling with exiting and succession planning, what in particular, what would you want to say to that owner right now? You're right in front of them. You're having a cup of coffee. What would be your final, only one thing you could say to them? What would that be?
Don't give up, right?
Mhm.
Don't give up. There's so many opportunities for businesses out there to partner with the right people, to grow and do what they're doing and do it well. And it can get, I mean, the life of an entrepreneur can be very lonely. It doesn't have to be though. I never had that experience because I always had partners. But even with partners, my component of the business that I was in charge of could get very lonely because there's not a lot of people that you can meet at the coffee shop and say, hey man, I got a $2 million cash flow problem this week. Any ideas? Right? There's not a lot of people that you can throw those ideas off of. And so getting involved in masterminds was a big deal and those sorts of things. That would be the business advice. Don't give up. But I do think that my ultimate advice would be don't lose the forest for the trees. If you're a Christian business owner, the forest is God and the trees are our businesses and our things that we have going on. Like, don't forget to step back and look at the beauty of the forest. Like, look at what God is doing in the world. Look at how God has grown you in your walk with Him through your business, and don't take your eyes off of Him through it. It's so easy. I mean, I worked those 120-hour weeks for years. I know it. And when you do that, there's no time for the Lord. I repent. I have repented of it, right? That's too long of a week to sustain. Like, you don't see your family, you don't have time for the Lord, you don't have time for the word. And so pull yourself out of that and say, if the trees burn, let them burn, but I'm not going to let the forest go down with it, right? And so making sure that that is at a personal level has become the most important guiding principle of all the things that I do, family and friends and small groups and church activities and businesses and all of it. It's like, I have got to have my time with the Lord first, and that has got to be my priority. If not, everything else can burn for all I care. I need to be on my face before the Lord every morning. And so I would say at a personal level, that is because that's it, right? The only thing we have to leave behind is our influence. And what influence do I have if it's not spiritual? So, okay, you make $1 trillion. who cares? Your great great grandkids are going to forget your name, right? So like the only influence that we can leave behind that actually matters is our spiritual influence. So I would say that that would be, in my mind, the number one important thing overall, even by far more and above business. So personally,
I love it. Keep first things first.
that's it.
I love it. That's such a great way to end. So, with that, Nathan, thank you so much for being here today and sharing so much wisdom. And like I said, we'll put a link to your email and your socials for people to reach out to you and they can follow you. And that'll all be in the description below. But with that, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate your time. It was a pleasure being here.